Lost in a foreign city during a pandemic, and how I learned to speak in public. It all started with a missed flight, just one minor error in a rushed airport terminal, a simple wrong turn, and suddenly I was on a plane to a country I didn't plan to visit, all alone, with a flight scheduled for the next day back home. I thought about turning back, but I'd already arrived, and fate, as I see it now, had other plans for me. I had been working for years as a mid level consultant for a company that wasn't exactly known for its work life balance. So when a work trip to Asia popped up, I jumped at the opportunity, eager to finally experience a place I'd heard so much about, Hong Kong. But this story isn't really about Hong Kong or the conference I was supposed to attend. It's about the most unexpected adventure I could have never foreseen, an adventure that, honestly, I still can't quite believe I survived. The first sign that something wasn't right came when I landed in the city, feeling the rush of humid air against my face as I stepped off the plane. I was excited, sure, but also incredibly out of my depth. I knew basic phrases, enough to get by, but nothing more. This was supposed to be a quick stop before heading back to work, a short getaway between meetings, but instead, I missed the connecting flight back. I remember standing in the terminal scanning the signs for help. My first mistake was approaching a desk that was barely open, and the second was assuming I could speak enough Cantonese to get the assistance I needed. I need a flight to the US, I said with a forced smile, fully aware that it didn't sound like a very coherent sentence. The attendant gave me a puzzled look. We both stood there in an uncomfortable silence before she finally offered me the next best thing, a voucher for a night at a nearby hotel. So I took my voucher, and with no other option, I accepted my fate. The thing is, I didn't just miss my flight, I missed my bearings. This hotel, hidden away in the farthest corner of the city, seemed like the only refuge I could find. But it was in the middle of a crisis. The year was 2020, and COVID-19 was starting to wreak havoc worldwide. While the hotel staff were kind enough to accommodate me, there was a strange tension in the air. Travelers were becoming scarce, and more than once I saw the staff disinfecting every corner with intense focus. I had arrived just at the tipping point before the strict lockdowns hit, but enough was happening that the city felt like it was holding its breath. I was stuck in a foreign city, half the world away from home, with a flight I couldn't catch and no idea when I'd be able to return. And in the midst of this chaos, I made another realization. I was utterly alone. Then everything changed. The next morning, after an awful night's sleep on the worst bed I'd ever experienced, I woke up to a flurry of news updates. Borders were closing, flights were being canceled, people were starting to panic. My first instinct was to figure out how I could get back home, but the situation was becoming increasingly complicated, so I did what I knew best. I emailed my work, updating them on my situation and trying to keep it professional. But then something strange happened. While I was waiting for a reply, I began hearing conversations in the hotel lobby. Most people were talking about the pandemic, yes, but I overheard a particular discussion that would change my perspective forever. The voices came from a group of guests who seemed to be staying for the long haul. They spoke not only about survival, but about making the most of being stranded. One person, a woman in her mid 40s, was telling the others about how she had been running a small startup for years but had never spoken publicly about it. She was about to launch a webinar but feared it wouldn't be successful. I don't know what it was, but something about her vulnerability struck me. She was terrified. She had built a business, and yet the thought of speaking in front of people, speaking at all, was overwhelming her. I didn't know why, but I felt compelled to help her. I don't consider myself a natural public speaker, but in that moment, I remembered my own fear. I could relate to her hesitation, the imposter syndrome that we all secretly battle with, and it dawned on me that maybe, just maybe, we could help each other. So I walked up to her after her conversation ended and introduced myself. She looked surprised but relieved, and we talked for a while. I asked her if she'd ever considered practicing her speaking skills in a less formal setting, just talking to a group of friendly strangers to boost her confidence. I don't know. I've never done something like that, she said. I smiled. Well, it's a weird time for everyone. Why not take advantage of it? I smiled. Well, it's a weird time for everyone. Why not take advantage of it? And just like that, I found myself in a very strange position. I had no idea how to make a speech, but I was about to give one anyway. A few minutes later, I found myself sitting in a circle with six strangers, all in a hotel lobby that was slowly becoming a sanctuary for those trapped by the virus. We decided to create a speaking club of sorts where we would take turns talking about our fears, our passions, and our life experiences. At first, my voice shook. I remember starting to speak, but no sound came out for a few seconds. Everyone stared, waiting. Then, something amazing happened. I began to speak, slowly at first, but then more confidently. I shared my story, how I ended up in Hong Kong by mistake, how the uncertainty of the world was paralyzing me, and how I had never imagined that speaking in front of people would one day become my way of coping with isolation. As I spoke, I could see the faces of the group soften. I wasn't perfect, but I was real. By the time my speech ended, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: pride. Not in my performance, but in the connection. The fear of speaking had been replaced by something else, something I didn't even know I needed. It was then that I realized the pandemic, the missed flight, and everything that had followed wasn't just about being stuck in a foreign city. It was about the unexpected lessons we learn in moments of chaos. It was about facing your fears head on and finding strength in the process. I don't know if I would have ever had the courage to speak publicly if I hadn't gotten stuck in Hong Kong, but somehow, despite everything that was happening in the world, I found my voice. And as the borders slowly opened and I finally boarded a flight home, I carried with me something I never expected: not just the knowledge of how to speak publicly, but the understanding that sometimes you have to get lost before you can find yourself. This narrative weaves together the unexpected loss of control, the isolation during the pandemic, and the growth of personal skills, blending the fear of speaking in public with a transformative experience. It's a tale of how chaotic circumstances can turn into an opportunity for self improvement.